in her preschool class finally heard the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And she got excited. She loved the story. She came home and immediately tried to retell the story to her mom with such excitement because it was such an amazing story. And in that, she's like, Mommy, and the prince kissed Snow White. And it was amazing. And do you know what happened next, Mommy? And then the mom just kind of chuckled and said, let me guess, they lived happily ever after? And she said, no, they got married. You know, getting married and living happily ever after isn't always the same thing. You know, sometimes when we get married, it's like, yes, this is awesome, this is exciting. And then real life hits, and then you realize this isn't as exciting as I imagined it. You know, last week we looked into the section of text of chapter 5, the book Song of Songs. And we saw the couple, this man and a woman, this shepherd king, marrying, and he got married to his bride. And so we talked about the wedding ceremony, but then also in the text, we talked about the honeymoon, because they went on the honeymoon and they consummated their marriage. Now if you've been following along, you quickly realize that the husband and the wife, they're madly, crazy in love with one another. They're very passionate towards one another. They're excited to be in each other's presence. And when they consummated the marriage, it was pure ecstasy and bliss. It was an amazing thing that they experienced and went through. And you would think at the pinnacle of all that the story, Song of Songs, should have stopped and said, and they lived happily ever after. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't, because the Bible is real life. The Bible doesn't paint this picture that marriage is pure bliss. It's stress-free. It's no problems. The Bible never paints that picture. The reality is the Bible tells us over and over and over that we are sinners and we need to be redeemed. And not only to be redeemed, but we need to be sanctified, made more like Christ over and over and over. I mean, how many of you know, married couples, that it's not always easy, right? That you're going to have some difficulties. How many of you know a married couple that has problems? We all know that couple. And if you don't know that couple, you're probably that couple. Because we all have problems. We all go through it. Even the honeymoon, sometimes that has a lot of problems. You know, when you go on your honeymoon to Mexico and you're like, hey, I paid $2.99 for a 2-week stay, and this is not what I thought it was going to be. Or even in my case specifically, when I went to my honeymoon, my Janice and I, we went to Puerto Vallarta and on the west side of Mexico. And I just thought, for some reason, being the whitest person on the planet, it would be a good idea to lay out in the sun for a little bit without any sunblock on. And then come to find out, I get second-degree sunburn and blisters all over my back. So even the honeymoon had its own problems, because that's life. Life happens. It's not always easy. It's not always perfect. It's not always what social media will tell us. And you know what I'm talking about. Social media, we always put forth the best. It has the right lighting, the right filters. We're always smiling. We crop out the mess in our bedroom or in our house just so it's like perfect. Well, that's not real life. Real life is hard, and it's difficult, and it's stressful, and it's very, very challenging. You know what they say, as iron sharpens iron, sparks will fly. I mean, things happen. So our main idea this morning, as we continue through our text of Song of Songs, chapter 5, as we go from verse 2 all the way to chapter 6, verse 3, our main idea this morning is this: trouble in the marriage doesn't mean it's the end. Just because you have trouble in your marriage, it doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean it's game over. Repentance leads to restoration. Now, picking up in chapter 5, verse 2, we see there's something wrong within this couple's marriage. There's something that happens. It was once amazing because they just had their wedding ceremony. They just had their honeymoon. They just consummated the marriage. Life is good. But then the next verse picks up and there's a shift. Something happened. Something went on. Something changed. Now, we don't know how much time has passed from the honeymoon till now, but time has happened. And then let's pick up in verse 2 and start. In verse 2 of chapter 5, Song of Songs, it says, the lady, the bride speaking, she says, I slept, but my heart was awake. So basically you can say she's restless. She can't get to sleep. She's tossing and turning. She says, listen, my lover is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my love, my dove, my flawless one. For my head is drenched with dew, my hair with the dampness of night. So what's happening in this scene? So what's really going on? They've been married for some time now. They're more than likely, they're back at their own place. It's late at night, and we know that because the husband comes home and he says, look, I'm covered in dew. Now, usually you get that early in the morning or real late at night. Obviously, he's been outside. Perhaps he's been working late. He had a late night at the office. She's been on the bed waiting for him to come home, but he's a no-show. See, too bad they didn't have phones back in the day. iPhones, you can track your spouse. You could do that, right? See, that would have helped them out, but they didn't do that. So what does she do? She grows impatient of waiting for him. Her mind is probably racing. Where is he? Why isn't he home by now? Does he not like me? She's probably starting to feel more neglected by her husband. So what does she do? She decides, well, I'm going to go to bed. I'm tired of waiting for him. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm tired. I'm going to sleep. His loss. Now, a little known history fact, royal couples back in that day, they actually had their own sleeping chambers. Husbands and the wives didn't share the same bed. They had their own bedrooms where they shaved, showered, slept, where they did all that. They had their own place. So she went into her room, she bathed, put on a nice robe, a little negligee probably. She was waiting for her husband to come home, and she waited, and she waited, and she waited, and waited, and he was a no-show. She's almost asleep when she hears a knock on the door. It's him. It's her lover. It's her husband. He's home from work. He knocks on her door, more than likely saying, hey, babe, it's time to relieve some work stress. Let's enjoy each other. But the door is locked. He can't get in. She's locked the door on the guy. He just wants to go and be with his wife, and he can't. So what does any man do in that situation? He starts talking and saying things like, hey, babe, it's me. Let me in. Look what he says. He says, open to me, my sister, my darling, my love, my dove, my flawless one. So basically he's saying, hey, babe, sweetheart, it's me. It's your stallion. Let me in. Now you would think after what we've been learning about this couple that she would have been eager to jump out of bed, let him in, but that's not what we find at all. See, the honeymoon bliss sometimes wears off. The newly couples getting married, sometimes it fades a little bit. That excitement, that passion subsides. Let's look what happened, what she said in verse 3. I have taken off my robe. Must I put it on again? I have washed my feet. Must I soil them again? Now, a little Hebrew for you guys if you want to learn some Hebrew. Basically, this is Hebrew for I have a headache. I'm not feeling it right now. I don't want to be inconvenienced. She's not having it. She's like, look, I'm already in bed. I've already taken off my robe. I'm laying in this bed butt naked, and you're not coming in. It's almost like she's throwing it in his face of saying, hey, you worked late. You were home when you're supposed to be. Your loss. See, what's happened is she's using intimacy to be leverage, to be as a weapon to control and conform her husband. Now, I don't know about you, but this husband, it doesn't matter. He didn't need the robe on anyway. What they were wanting to do, it didn't matter. And more than likely, he wasn't concerned about if her feet were a little dirty or not. It probably didn't matter to him at all. So what she's saying to him, he's saying, look, you're home again late. I'm tired of it. I'm sick and tired of it. Bad timing, your loss. Now, let's just say this. She does have the right to be upset. I mean, that's just that's just a reality. She's pretty upset, but the way that she's going to resolve her frustration, now that's wrong. She's manipulating the physical intimacy to conform to what she wants. She said, I'm upset, so therefore, you're not having any of this. Basically is what she's saying. Husbands, what would you do in that situation? You come home, you want to be with your wife, and she's like, no, you're not coming in this bedroom at all. What would you do in that? You know, I was thinking, have you guys ever watched that horror movie, The Shining, with Jack Nicholson? There's a scene in there where his wife is locked in the bathroom, and then he wants to reach her. Now, obviously, it's not for intimacy. He wants to kill her, but just for, you know, for example's sake, he actually takes an axe and he starts busting down the door. And it's where you get that famous scene in that movie where there's a slit in the door and he peeks his head in and he's like, here's Johnny. You guys ever seen that? And so husbands, I don't recommend doing that. I don't recommend chopping down your door and saying, here I am, open the door because here I come. Don't do that. And it's not also the best opportunity to start throwing out scripture in their face. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 7:3, it tells us that the wife's body is not her own and she should not deprive her husband. That's something wives need to know, but that's not something they need to know in that situation. You know, when we use the Bible, scripture is to be used to build up, to edify, to transform. It's not to be used as ammunition to cut down and destroy. We always want to be tender and love people in a way that would inspire them, encourage them. So the scenario in this song, in this story, is one that's pretty familiar in a lot of homes. It's pretty familiar with a lot of marriages because this happens all the time. We have struggles. The wife begins to feel neglected at home. She doesn't feel appreciated. She doesn't feel like she is the apple of his eye. They start thinking like, oh, he doesn't pursue me like he once did. He doesn't buy me flowers or chocolates or presents anymore. And so what happens is the wives start feeling betrayed, and the husbands, they feel rejected by their wife over and over and over. And so that's what's happening, and no one's addressing it. And if you don't address it, it festers. And if it remains unresolved and there's conflict within the marriage and we don't address it, we don't say anything, it causes harm and it destroys. So the husband leaves in this story. He walks away, he leaves. You know, and that's a beautiful picture of Christ. Not that he walks out on us and leaves us. It's just that Jesus doesn't force himself upon us. That's the beauty of Jesus. You know, the Bible says that he stands at the door and knocks on our heart, waiting to come in. Time and time and time again. And then there's a time after knocking and waiting and pursuing so much, he finally says, you know what, it's okay. I'm going to give you over to your own desires. And then he leaves. That's the beauty of Christ. He doesn't force himself to make us believe in him. He doesn't manipulate anything to make us choose him. It's a free gift, something that we have to choose. So this shepherd king more than likely heads back to his own room, hits the hay because he has to wake up early the next day. Now let me just point something out that needs to be said. Husbands working late for long periods of time, sometimes that can be a telltale sign that something's amiss in the marriage. Now, not all the times, and I know it's not fair to categorize that with every situation, because there is a very real reality where husbands must work late hours because of projects or deadlines. Like, there's a truth, there's a reality to that. So I'm not saying if you're working late, there's something wrong within your marriage. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that there is a very real reality, is that when there is problems at home, it's easier for guys to find their validation at work, because at least there they're respected. So we don't know why this man was working late. We don't know why he came in late. The Bible doesn't say, and again, this is a book of poetry. Song of Songs is a book of poetry. We're not to read into it too deep and manipulate it. We got to just take it for what it is. So we don't know why he's working late, but there's a problem within the marriage. You know, men as providers for their family, we have a tendency to work a lot. That's just truth. There's a lot of pressure for us to work all the time, and then in the work, it's easy for men to find their worth and their identity in their jobs. I mean, think about that's how we introduce ourselves, right? When there's small talk going on, that's what we say. We're like, "Hi, I'm so and so. What do you do?" "Well, this is what I do." It's a way that we can identify ourselves and communicate that. You know, the other day I was in Verizon. We're looking to switch over, and I was talking with the sales guy, and then as we were waiting for his computer to load, he had the small talk. And you know, when guys have small talk, we say, "What do you do?" And he asked me, he's like, "Hey, so what do you do?" And I told him I'm pastor. And you should have saw his reactions. Like, "Oh, that's cool." It is very cool. See, we have this thing where we find our identity in our jobs. We find our validation in our jobs. And it's unhealthy. That's not who we are. Not our jobs. We're not our jobs. Our jobs don't define us. So women, wives, ladies, there's a lot of pressure for men at their jobs because they know that they are expendable. That if they're not performing at high level at their job, that there's 10 other guys eager to take their job. So the reality is when they go to work, there are pressures. There are a lot of other things that they have focusing on their mind. There's tons of pressure. But what happens as well, wives, on the other end of that, they start to feel neglected. Because the husband's focusing so much at work, they at home are feeling neglected and feeling not appreciated. And when the husband comes home, sometimes all they want is intimacy, and then it makes the woman feel like a tool to be used or a way to fulfill her husband's urges. You know, Ephesians 5 in the New Testament, it's probably one of the best section of scriptures when it comes to marriage, when it comes to how husbands and wives should relate. And at the end of chapter 5, in verse 33, listen to what Paul tells the Ephesians. He says, "But each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and a wife must respect her husband." This verse reveals a woman's deepest relational need is to feel loved. A woman's deepest relational need is to feel loved. And a man's deepest relational need is to feel respected. Husbands, we want to be respected. Women, wives, you want to feel loved. So if the husband isn't feeling respected, and if the wife isn't feeling loved, Houston, we have a problem. It's a never-ending cycle that's never going to be addressed. And so here's what often happens. If the woman is feeling unloved from her husband, she reacts in a way that seems disrespectful to her husband. And then the husband receives that, and then he's upset, so he responds in a way that makes the woman feel unloved. And it's a vicious cycle that's doomed for repeat unless there's intervention, unless there's a resolve. The more she complains and criticizes, the more he shuts down. That's just truth. That's what happens. And that's why men go to work so often. Oh, I'm going to work. It's the way to get out of the house, to leave the pressures. See, marriage is not about finding that right person. Marriage is about being that right person. See, there's things that we have to experience and go through in our marriage that's going to cause us to speak up. That's going to cause us to ask for forgiveness. That's going to cause us to say, "I'm sorry." Let's get back to our story. Look at verse 4 and 7 of chapter 5. It says, "My beloved thrust his hand through the latch opening. My heart began to pound for him. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with flowing myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had left. He was gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. They beat me. They bruised me. They took away my cloak, those watchmen on the walls. Now, many theologians and commentators are divided over this section of Scripture. Many believe that what's happening here is a dream, is that she's having a dream because she went back to sleep and now she's having a dream. Many believe that this isn't a dream, that this is just the reality of her actions, that God was punishing her for being disobedient to her husband. I tend to believe that it is a dream. And the reason why I believe that, because if you look at verse 7, it says that she was beat up by the watchmen. The watchmen were the city police. Now, it's almost hard to imagine the queen getting assaulted and beaten by the police. That's a recipe for instant death for those police officers or the watchmen. And then also, and when you go on in verse 8 and a little bit later on, she sees her friends and she never mentions what happened to her. And then when she finds her husband later on, she never mentions getting beat down. So again, I think she is having this dream. So in this dream, she remembers her husband reaching through and touching the latch of the door. She remembers hearing her husband trying to open the gate, trying to open the door. And then her heart is stirred. So she's excited. Oh, he's here, he's here. So she gets out of bed and goes to open it. And then her hands are covered in myrrh of a cologne. It's probably, nowadays, they're probably like Versace for men, something like that. So, back in the day, that was a custom. When men were in love with a woman, instead of leaving flowers or notes or cards at the girl's house, they would cover the door handles with a fragrance. It was a way of showing affection and love towards that person. And so here, this husband, even though he was rejected by his wife, he still pursues her and leaves myrrh covered all over her door. See, the husband loved her dearly. He wasn't mad or angry with her. He was probably hurt. He's probably upset, but not enough to distance himself. She then went out calling and receives the beatdown of her life from the police. Now again, whether this was a dream or reality, I think the way that we should interpret that is that it's not necessarily whether she's having a dream or not, but what it's expressing, what it's communicating. See, I think her subconscious was wrecked, and then it caused her to have a dream like that. You know that our subconscious controls our dreams sometimes? You ever experience something in your life and you dream about it all the time? It happens. Our subconscious affects our dreams. I remember as a waiter, I would always have work nightmares. If anybody's ever been a waiter for a long time, you know what I'm talking about. It's where you have this dream where you're working and there's no tables, no one in your section. And then all of a sudden, everybody comes in at once, all 6 tables filled with big parties. And then you're trying to scramble and get their orders and their drinks and get everybody, and it's a nightmare. I've had those dreams many, many times. And it's because my subconscious, because of my work, it affected my dreams. And so more than likely, this lady, she started to feel convicted about her actions, about neglecting her husband. She started to feel bad about what she was doing. So in the dream, she gets up and goes looking for him. She wants to make it right. See, church, when we're hurt or offended or neglected in our marriage, we tend to usually take the I'm going to wait for him to apologize approach. We always take the approach of like, I've been hurt, I've been offended, I'm upset, so I'm going to stand my ground and wait till they apologize. I'm not apologizing first. That's usually what we do. But what we see here, she's taken the action upon herself to make things right. See, we want people to apologize for their actions, but that doesn't happen all the time, right? We want our spouse to be the one to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, would you forgive me? But that doesn't happen all the time. It's because of pride. We don't want to be upset. We don't want to be let down. And so how do we respond when the honeymoon is over and real life happens? How are we able to forgive and to be forgiven in our marriage? Is we are to react according to the Spirit, not according to the flesh. So if there's challenges and problems within our marriage, how can we resolve that? How can we reconcile that? It's to act according to the Spirit, not according to the flesh. See, our flesh, our natural self, it has that tendency of fight or flight. We have that tendency to say, it's either I'm going to run from this or I'm going to stand my ground and I'm going to fight about this. You know, if we're not leaving, usually what happens is we get angry. We get angry towards our spouse and we say things that are hurtful. We say things that cut deep. I mean, we know our spouses. We know their weak spots. And so usually we get so frustrated we go there. And we say things that hurt and that dig deep. You know, listen to Paul's wisdom for the church of Ephesus. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 and 27. It says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil." So basically saying, in your anger, do not sin. See, anger is a very real emotion, and sometimes it's okay. But it's how we respond when we're angry. That's what matters. That's really what makes the difference. When we're angry, how do we respond? Do we respond according to our old way of life, according to the flesh? Do we retaliate? Do we name call? Do we throw them under the bus? Or do we react according to the Spirit in love and patience and kindness and gentleness? You know, not dealing with problems and challenges, hoping that it all just works out eventually, it's not going to work out like that. The only way to reconcile differences in our marriage is to address it, and is to talk about it, and is to bring it up. And usually we don't want to do that because it's awkward, it hurts. We don't want to bring that up, it's sensitive. But the only way to have restoration in our marriage and reconciliation is to talk about things, is to bring it up. City Grace, let me tell you this, the devil is a liar and he is going to try to destroy your marriage. That's just truth. He's going to try to destroy your relationships. He's going to start playing with your mind. You're going to start thinking to yourself, you're going to let him talk like you like that? Who does he think he is? The audacity. Then you're going to start thinking about those things. And it's going to start festering. And then it's going to take root and it's going to boil down into bitterness. And then that bitterness is going to take control of your heart and in your mind. And that's when many jump ship and do things and say things that don't honor our spouse and they don't honor God. It's just what happens. So the key in this type of situation is learning how to react according to the Spirit of God, not according to your old ways, the flesh. You know, your flesh wants to give your marriage an uppercut. Counter it with a hook. Say, you know what? No, I'm not going to allow this to happen in our marriage. You know, if you're having an argument, because it's going to happen. You have arguments with your spouse. You might say, oh, we're fighting. You're not really fighting. You just have an argument. And so when you have an argument, how are you going to respond to that? Are you just going to shut up, shut down, and just close off and be like, I'm not talking to you? Good. We have to learn to respond according to the Spirit of God. We got to say things, be like, look, I know I'm not perfect. I know I make mistakes. I know I don't get it right. But I love you too much. I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up on us. I'm willing to work. I'm willing to hear you out. I'm willing to listen. Whatever it takes. According to the Spirit. I get it. Easier said than done. This isn't the kind of thing that you flip on. This isn't like we have godly switches that we just flip on. All of a sudden, I'm godly now. Let me respond nice. It doesn't work that way. It's hard. But it's something that we have to learn to do over and over and over. Learning to respond according to the Spirit, it happens long before a conflict arises. You know, James chapter 4, verse 7 and 8 says it perfectly. He says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Usually the second half of that verse is what we hold on to. Resist the devil and he will flee. Just resist the devil and he can't mess with you. You're a Christian. It's fine. Usually we hold on to that. And then what we find out is that's easier said than done. It's difficult. It's hard to resist the devil. It's because we omit the first part, submitting to God. You know, our flesh is weak. We don't have the strength to overcome every problem in life. But when we learn to trust God and to hold on to Him and to allow Jesus to be our strength, we can, through His power, resist the temptations that we face. And it starts with meeting with the Lord daily, meeting with God every day, submitting to Him, learning to listen to His voice, learning to pray and to talk with Him. When's the last time you connected with God? Was it this morning, last night, last week, last month? Was it in college when you took an exam? God, please help me pass this test. When was the last time we connected? See, submitting to God, it needs to take place on the reg. It needs to happen daily. Because it's through that we get the strength to respond according to the Spirit. And within marriages, we need to learn how to do that all the time. Because if we don't, we can easily get offended over every little thing. Our spouse can say one thing and I'm offended. We love being offended in our culture. I mean, we are a society that is in love with being offended. I'm offended that you say I love being offended. That's literally how it is. We just love being offended. But when we learn how to submit to the Lord and listen to Him, draw near to God, in verse 8 of James 4, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. That's a beautiful promise. No matter what mistake we make in our marriage, when we draw near to God, He will draw near to us. He doesn't leave us. He doesn't forsake us. You know, when it comes to forgiveness, I came across this list that pretty much summed it up. I thought it really well, and I thought I'd use it. I don't remember who originally wrote it, but I'm using it. It's pretty sweet. So it says, knowing what forgiveness is not. You know, we say we want forgiveness and we want reconciliation. Sometimes you know things better by what they're not. And so let me give you a little list of what forgiveness isn't. Forgiveness isn't waiting for an apology. That's not forgiveness. Waiting for an apology isn't forgiveness. Forgiveness is being proactive. It's seeking restitution and reconciliation. Whether somebody apologizes or not, forgiveness is on you. You choose to do it. Forgiveness is not forgetting. You know, they say, you need to forgive and forget. Sometimes forgetting isn't in that same equation. Sometimes we've been really hurt by people, and it hurts deep. And so through that, there can be real pain that we experience. And whether we remember that or not remember it, forgiveness doesn't hinge on your feeling of forgetting. It's choosing not to bring it back. Even though you still remember it, even though you still remember what they did to you, forgiveness is choosing to not bring it back. To not bring it up later in arguments. We've had that. Janice and I, we've had those arguments before in our marriage, our 10 years, where one of us would bring up something from the past, and it's like, oh, we can't do that. We've already apologized for that. We've already said sorry for that. So forgiveness isn't necessarily forgetting. It's choosing not to bring it back. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. In order to reconcile, it takes two. You can do everything you can to reconcile someone that's hurt. But you know what? Sometimes you can't control them. Sometimes people take a hurt to the grave, and they leave that bitterness. And no matter how many times you say, I'm sorry, or you forgive me, sometimes they won't never let it go. And in order for you to forgive them, it's not dependent upon their reconciliation. You just got to do what you have to do to forgive. Forgiveness isn't denial or minimizing the pain or the hurt. Forgiveness isn't just saying, oh, it's okay, it wasn't a big deal. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't saying, it's not like Jesus was, never will you ever find Jesus saying, oh, don't worry about it, that's just a little white lie, it's okay. No, Jesus would be like, hey, let's call it what it is. That was sin. You need to stop that. And so we need to do the same thing. We don't need to minimize it because sometimes words cut deep. And we can't just rub it off and just be like, oh, it's okay, he didn't mean it. Sometimes you just got to say, look, that hurt. But regardless, I'm not going to bring that back up again because I'm choosing to forgive it. You know, forgiveness isn't a single event. Forgiveness isn't a one-time thing sometimes. It's not to say, hey, I've asked for forgiveness, boom, I'm done. And the reason why it's not a single event, because sometimes maybe weeks go by, months go by, maybe years go by. And then that feeling of pain and hurt, it resurfaces. And then again, you have to choose, you know what, I'm not going to be led by this feeling because I've already chose to forgive them. And so it's something that we have to do all the time. When we're tempted to bring it back up in an argument with our spouse, we say, no. I still forgive you for that. I'm still not going to use that as a weapon in our arguments. Let's continue our story here in verse 8. Verse 8, the girl, the lady, the bride, she runs into her girlfriends. And listen to what she says. She says, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my lover, what will you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love. Basically, she's saying, hey, girls, if you see my man, tell him I love him. Tell him I can't stop thinking about him. Tell him I am lovesick. And the way that these girls respond is very, very interesting. And it's very, very important. Look at the way that they respond to her. Verse 9 of chapter 5, Song of Songs. They say, how is your lover better than others, most beautiful of women? How is your beloved better than others that you charge us so? See, at first glance, it kind of seems as if they're negative. It's as if they're saying, like, what? You're still with that scrub? Man, what? What's so special about this guy? Why are you even still with this loser? See, that's what it seems like they're saying, but that's not what they're saying at all. Actually, what they're saying is that they're proving that these are tremendous friends. These ladies are doing something really smart here. They're saying, tell us again why you love him. Remind us. Tell us what it is about him that makes him so special. Now, this is an important lesson when we have conflict in our marriage. You want friends in your life who will help you fight for your marriage, not against your marriage. You need people in your life that are going to push you towards fighting for your marriage and not against your marriage. Too often, what happens when ladies get together, oh, you'll never believe what my husband did last night. And then the response, oh, girl, let me tell you what my husband did. And it becomes one of these like husband bashing sessions. And it's for some way we think that we feel edified in that, knowing that our lives aren't perfect as long as someone else's life isn't perfect either. See, our natural tendency to get together with other people is to complain. Is to complain about our husbands or our wives. But we need friends in our lives that are going to point us to Christ. We need friends in our lives that are going to say, hey, did you pray about it? What is God telling you to do in this? See, those are the kind of people we need in our lives. People that are going to push us towards godliness and good deeds. People that are going to push us towards Christ. Not people that are going to feed a festering sin amongst our marriage. Girl, you shouldn't be with him anyway. Or, you're still with that chick? You need to ditch her, man. There's plenty of other women out there that would love you. See, we don't need people like that in our lives. We need people that will speak truth. You need friends in your lives who remind you of why you fell in love with your spouse. These girls are saying, hey, tell us. They know that there's a problem. They know that there's something going on. But their response to her was, tell us again why you love this man so much. Because you know what happens when we get in an argument? We usually focus on the difficulties and we forget all the good. We usually focus on the negative and the bad and the world's ending and it's all coming down, and we forget the reality that, man, there's so much more. Look, if you don't know of any good things about your spouse, start brainstorming now. Start writing them down. Save them on your phone. So when you get in that argument, you can go back to, like, oh yes, this is why I'm in love with my spouse. This is why I chose to marry this person. To be reminded of the good things. It's too easy to only focus on the negative. You know, Paul says in Philippians 4:8, he says, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are good, if there's anything that's virtuous, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate and think upon those things. So he's saying stop focusing on all the negatives and the bads. Start focusing on the good things. Start focusing on the blessings of your spouse or your significant other. So her friends say, remind us why he's so special. And she responds in this lengthy discourse. And she responds from verse 10 through 16, and it changes her. Let's look at this. Verse 10, she says, my lover is radiant and ruddy, stands out among 10,000 men. Basically, she's saying he is handsome. Out of 10,000 men, he is the guy. Verse 11, she goes on, his head is like the finest gold, saying that his wisdom is worth gold. His wisdom is far beyond anything else. She goes on, his locks are wavy and black as a raven. I guess she's into long, wavy black hair. She's into that thing, I guess. His eyes are like doves. They're gentle, they're tender. By the rivers and waters washed with milk and fitly set. She's saying that he has those eyes that you can just trust. It's that when you look in his eyes, you know that he's telling the truth and that he's being honest. Verse 13, his cheeks are like a bed of spices, banks of scented herbs. His lips are lilies dripping liquid myrrh. Is that he's compassionate towards her. When he kisses her tenderly and compassionately. In verse 14, his arms are like rods of gold set with crystallite. His body is carved of ivory inlaid with sapphires. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of fine gold. His countenance is like Lebanon, excellent as all cedars. Basically, he's a squat kind of guy. He loves the squats. His body is amazing. He is strong. He is built like marble. He's built like the finest. He is like amazing. That's what she's saying. See, now these are all analogies that speak to the fact that this shepherd king, that her husband was strong. He was dependable. He was noble. He had great character, great faith. He was worth it, of everything. You know, I remember when Janice broke her toe, we were taking her to the car because we had to go to the ER. And so we started where she was, you know, on my shoulder kind of hobbling along. And I'm like, look, babe, this isn't, you want me just to carry you to the car? And she was like, I don't know. This girl didn't think I could pick her up. This girl didn't think I was strong enough to carry her. She's going to learn today. And so I picked her up and I carried her to the car, and I'm cracking up because I'm like, you didn't think I was strong enough to carry you to the car. Are you kidding me? So this lady, she's like, man, my husband's strong. That's what I like about him. He's super strong. He's caring. He's compassionate. He's tender. He's trustworthy. That's why I love this guy. That's why he's my beloved and my beloved is mine. That's why, girls, I married this guy. See, sometimes when we get in arguments in our marriage, we have to think back all the good things. Why did we get married? Why are we together? What is it about my spouse that I'm in love with? And vice versa. See, you want friends in your life that are going to remind you of that are going to push you towards reconciliation. You don't want people in your life that are just going to gossip and slander and throw your spouse under the bus. You want people in your life that are going to give truth and wisdom. And it was when they asked her that question, she started explaining about the things she loved about her husband, and it changed everything. It changed her perspective completely. In chapter 6, verse 1 through 3, it breaks it down very clearly. Her friends ask, "Where has your beloved gone, O fairest among women? Where has your beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with you?" Basically, they're saying, well, where do you think he is? Tell us where you think he is. We'll go help find you. See, not only do you need friends that are going to say what needs to be said and point you to truth, you need friends in your life that are willing to lay down their life for you as well. Willing to do whatever it takes. But now that she's reflected on the type of guy that he is, she knows exactly where he is. Because he's dependable. He's consistent. She knows exactly where he is. He's in the garden tending his flock like he should be. Look at verse 2 through 3. "My beloved has gone to his garden, to the beds of spices, to feed his flock in the gardens, and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He feeds his flock among the lilies." See, nothing's changed. I am my beloved's, and he is mine. She is confident that he will forgive her of her actions. She is confident, and she knows that he's trustworthy, that he still loves her. Why? Because she knows that he's a man who wants to honor God, and she knows that he really does love her. Let me just give you 5 applications here to take away from today's story. The first is this. Men, your wives need love. They do. They need you to love her. Honestly. And not love isn't like intimacy love. They need to feel loved. They need to feel loved. Women, your husbands need to be respected. It's just reality. They need to know that you respect them, that you value them. If he's not getting respect from you, he's going to find it somewhere else. It's probably going to be in his job, or maybe with somebody else. They just need to know that you respect them. 3, if there's conflict in your marriage, don't react according to the flesh. React according to the Spirit. Learn to respond in a godly, Christ-like way. And this is only possible when you yourself are connecting with God daily. If you're not connecting with God, it sure is hard to operate according to the Spirit. Number 4, you need friends in your life who will fight for your marriage with you. You need friends in your life who will stand up and say what needs to be said, who will support you, who will encourage you. You need friends in your life who are going to point you towards Jesus. And sometimes hearing those things are difficult, but you need those friends in your life. And lastly, if there's conflict, don't wait for your spouse to say, "I'm sorry." Initiate it. Initiate. Be the one who initiates. Initiating forgiveness is the way that forgiveness is handled. If we sit and wait for the other person to say sorry, sometimes we're going to be waiting for a very, very long time. We take the initiative. There's a lot to learn throughout this song and this story, and as we continue on next week, we'll see the amazing response of her husband and how it really points towards Christ. But let me just encourage you, if you're married today here, keep fighting for each other. Don't give up. Keep loving and praying and supporting. If you're single, if you're not married, that's okay. In timing, it's whatever. But learn how to trust the Lord now. Learn how to resolve and meet with Him daily now, so that when you do get in a relationship or when you do get married, you can lead the relationship well.